right. There it is. I don't think that my other stuff got in under the gun. We're back. I don't know if I'm stealing your line.
We're back again. We did it.
Once again, 2 weeks. I know. It's a miracle. Some might argue.
The masses have been clamoring, and here we are.
My DMs are... There's no space. I'm out of space in my DMs.
It's true. Yeah, so many middle-aged men. We're just like attractive women in that way. The only people who want to talk to us are middle-aged men.
Yes. I think that young men and old men want to talk to attractive women, to be honest with you.
That's fair. Yeah. But for us, it's just a certain age demo. It's the over 35s.
Yes. But yeah, we're like between 35 and 43. If you're in those age ranges, you might like this podcast. If you're younger or older, you probably don't.
Yeah, we're very niche.
So I don't want to blow up your life. You can give as much detail as you choose to. You said you had a baby emergency. It pushed us back almost 15 minutes. Last week, I probably alluded to it briefly on the podcast, but I was very tired. And we recorded on Tuesday. I got between Monday and Tuesday, maybe Sunday, like a combined, I don't know, like 7.5 hours of sleep or something like that. It was rough. It was the most tired I'd been since the first weeks of our youngest daughter's life. And we had some of those moments in there where it's like, I am exhausted and the baby spits up and shits at the same time. The other one's at full energy, you know what I mean? And we're like, fighting, looking up adoption agencies as we're just struggling through parenthood.
Yeah, it's not fun when that happens. You guys are probably at the phase where there's like the regression in sleep for the baby.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to that. Luckily, we're not there yet. But
we've discovered through, well, I don't know. Everyone, this is the thing. Everyone's very judgmental about kids. You can fucking don't talk to me. I don't want to hear your DMs. We discovered with our first that you can give Tylenol, a small amount of Tylenol to a young child.
And now you have this baby on a full bottle anytime.
Yeah, this baby is addicted to Tylenol. We shoot it into her veins. Is that okay? No, basically the last, I would say 5 of the last 7 nights, right about bedtime, she's teething. So she's just losing her mind. She's completely inconsolable. And the reason is because she's in pain, and Tylenol is a pain reliever. I have had to explain to multiple, let's call them for the sake of, let's say grown women who didn't raise me, but raised someone who lived in my household, who lives in my household, that Tylenol is not, in fact, a cold medicine. It is just a pain reliever. Or if it can reduce a fever, but it's doing nothing for colds. Because we had some of those like snotty baby issues,
Sure. Yeah. Whatever Tylenol does, it works for me. That's my...
You take it for a cold?
I mean, it reduces pain. I'm not saying that I take it for a cold. I'm just saying if I'm in pain from the cold, if my head hurts or whatever. Yeah. The thing about a cold is there's really nothing you can do. Once you have the cold, you're just going to have to ride this out. And we should know. No one should know better than people in the Pacific Northwest. Anytime I go to drier climates, you talk to people who are from there, they'll always have some crazy story about, I haven't been sick in like 15 years since I moved to Arizona. And you're like, well, I don't know if I believe that, but I do believe that you probably get sick a little less than we do.
And it's because the
cold up here.
The illness dies at 111 degrees. So
yeah,
that's
yeah, that's true. It just boils off. No, we don't have any real issues here. We're just, our daughter learned how to scream this weekend, which is great because it's like now she can vocalize all of her emotions, which sometimes they're happy screams and sometimes they're not as happy. And so she's just very vocal right now. So if she's feeling fussy, everybody knows. Everybody in the house will know. So we're just kind of dealing with that, making sure she calmed down a little bit. She also is at this stage where when it becomes close to time to sleep, whether it's her nap in the middle of the day or bedtime at the end of the day, she just fights it. She's one of those people that fights sleep at this stage in her life. And for no real reason, she just doesn't want to go to bed. And I get it. when you're a kid, you never want to go to bed. I never wanted to
Yeah.
go to bed as a kid. You never want to take a nap. It's just, I didn't think it would happen this early. I
Yeah, that's
figured
it.
maybe she'd start doing that later, but she just doesn't like to sleep. She likes to be entertained.
So we've had, and I'm not telling you, I'm not giving you parenting advice, Alex. I'm sure we're fucking these kids up in some way, but I do have a question, which is because this is how it's gone for us, which I understand. Every kid's different. I'm not all of the necessary qualifiers and throat clearing. It's a podcast conversation, not me. But so we've never done co-sleeping, and also I will say, my wife and I have this constant argument with because our daughter is still very young, a little older than yours. But it's when she sleeps, it's because she's tired. And so I don't like try to stop her from sleeping very much during the day. And then what I've noticed is, do enough to engage her, all that stuff, and at night put her in a dark room, she'll fall asleep. That being said, that doesn't solve for this teething issue. It doesn't solve for the time she's had a cold. It's not a perfect fail-proof solution. But we've been very disciplined about that specific thing, co-sleeping, and put her at 8:00. So we don't really have like a bedtime or like a nap time, a designated nap time during the day. Do you already have a designated nap time with this kid?
No, we don't
Oh,
have.
okay. All right.
We don't really have designated anything. It's
Good.
just we try to focus around certain times of day. I mean, you get to
I was
about
gonna
this
feel like
point-
a shit parent.
we get to like middle of the day. It's like you should be ready to take a nap. You haven't napped all morning,
Right.
and she fights it. That's just what she does. So, and putting like at the end of the day, putting her in a dark room, if she's not already asleep, trying to put her down to go to sleep is impossible. You
Sure.
basically have to hold her until she falls asleep, which I'm sure a lot of people deal with out there. Last night we actually managed to pull it off, a very clean transfer from the bed to the bassinet without actually waking up. That was remarkable. And then when she did wake up later on, we were able to actually get her back to sleep very quickly, which for my wife and I was a miracle. So it doesn't always happen easily, but overall I'd say we've been pretty lucky. We get a decent amount of sleep. That's the one thing anyone who doesn't have kids will always ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, are you sleeping? You have a baby, huh? Oh, are you sleeping at all? And it's nice that they ask. It's always nice when people like ask questions to show that they care about your well-being. That's what we do as a society. But the people that haven't gone through it have no idea what it's like. I mean, one of my friends who had kids before I did explained it to me once. You've explained it to me too, but he said it's like it's the tiredest you'll ever be. It's totally worth it, but it's the tiredest you'll ever be. And you just kind of get used to it. I mean, for me, I was like, the actual tiredness didn't bother me. It was every day in the first couple months, like looking in the mirror and being like, God, I can't get rid of these bags under my eyes. They're just like twice as big as they used to be.
Right.
Which we all have our issues with aging, but actually seeing the results of being tired staring you in the face in the bathroom, you're like, God, this is the worst. It's like I can live with being tired. I can't live with looking like shit.
Yeah, I mean, you were a real dime piece before that, so I understand why. The thing to me that was always the most, I think, difficult to deal with was knowing that it was like there's kind of no end in sight most of the time. You know what I mean? Like you go, yeah, I'm tired, but it's not like you have an opportunity to go to sleep at 7 and sleep till, 7 in the morning and make up sleep. Especially, by the way, having a kid with a partner on purpose has given me a newfound respect for people who raise kids on their own, because whatever the circumstances that get you there, which sometimes are not as respectable, right? I have some friends who have become single parents through less than respectable, or whatever you're supposed to say now. Who knows? I might be a piece of shit for saying this, but I have some friends who have become parents on accident, and then they have this alone time with a kid. But the amount of extra effort that would be required without a partner there, because it's not just. I don't even think, by the way, it would be double the effort. Let's say you and your wife are sharing 50% of the responsibility. There's still little things like she can hold the door open while you pull the car seat out. She can the baby spits up all over you. She can bring you a rag or whatever. Like, you don't have to get up and then pour all the milk that's on you over the floor that you now have to clean the floor up. It's just very small things like that I just like. It would be double plus. It's like 125% more work to be a single parent, and it's just feels impossible considering how difficult it is to be a parent in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. It seems like it would be a difficult job. They kind of on TV and movies, they kind of gloss over all the hard stuff when
Sure.
they're doing shows about single parents. Yeah, it would not be fun. I've been fortunate that I haven't had to spend tons and tons of time with just the baby. You know, there just haven't been too many situations where my wife has gone off to do her own thing for a while. But the few times I have, for me, it's like, if it's just a few hours, you can totally manage. If it's overnight, if it's all the time, I mean, there's just no, like you said, you don't see an end in sight when it's two of you. I can only imagine how crushing that feeling must be when there's only one of you, and
Yeah.
if you have a support system or whatever, that's one thing. But if you don't have that, I mean, I just don't even know. It's like, even like daycare and stuff, man. And people generally know this, but like, we found a daycare that is going to cost us about $1,500 a month for one child. And that's a pretty reasonable rate these days. I'm sure it differs in different parts of the country, but around here, that's a reasonable rate. And I can't imagine doing that on a single salary. The people that have just a single salary and they're paying that much, it's like you basically have no possible way of like climbing out of debt if you want your child taken care of, which is just, it's wild that this is the way that we've kind of structured that part of our society. Now you could feel however you want about all different parts of society, but when it comes to like childcare and parenting, we certainly haven't made it easy on people. And yet at the same time, we want people to just keep having kids for whatever reason. It's like, we want you to have kids, but we're going to make it as hard as possible once you have that kid for you to raise it without it becoming a complete piece of crap. It's just, I don't know, man, we could do better. Certainly.
Okay, briefly, is my camera, like, is it the choppiest it's ever been in the history of this program?
No, you look amazing.
And all my motions are like
well,
fluent.
it's a little choppy.
All right, hold on, it's bugging me.
Here's the thing about you don't move much, so
hold on, I got it. Let me
idle.
I'm hopefully editing this out or leaving it in, but I'm going to stop my camera.
Okay.
Hold on. God damn it.
I don't know. This might be it might be good content.
This is great. I'm glad that my body's not showing right now.
No, are you like taking off your shirt? Okay.
That's a little
shirt
better.
Stays on. That's good.
It's not great. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this thing. It's
it's all right.
It's never easy. Okay, well, people are just going to get choppy video. Yeah.
The audio is what matters.
All right, I'm back.
Oh, you're moving normal now.
Moving normal. It's not a big choppy mess. Okay.
What'd you do?
I switched cameras. I switched to just like a webcam. It's not as pretty, but
no, you basically look the same. I don't.
How dare you? How dare you?
All right, yeah, we got a lot of things that are
a lot on the docket.
There. Yeah, the baseball free agency is finally moving now, thankfully.
Yes. And obviously there was one big cog in the way, which I think is probably going to be the first topic of the day.
Sure. We can get to that in a minute. What else do we have today?
The Seahawks continue to struggle. I believe the first 4-game losing streak in the Pete Carroll era, and a fifth looming as they play the Eagles on Monday Night Football, which, by the way, I'm going to that game, and it's very frustrating that it got flexed to Monday because it's going to be a rough morning.
Yeah, if you're actually going to the games, like it's always wild to me that I know people that have season tickets, and anytime a Monday or Thursday night game gets thrown on that schedule, but especially Monday, you can always sell your tickets for a profit, which is just wild because I'm always shocked that people are willing to pay more to go to a game on a Monday when it's like you're going to have to leave work early or take the day off. The next day, you're probably going to feel like crap. Like, let's not beat around the bush. You're going to get home at like 11 o'clock or something, having been at this game, lubed up. It's going to be tough. But
I know. Well, I'm going, so I'll be slightly less lubed because I'm going with my mom.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe your mom is a raging alcoholic. We don't know.
She's and I'll be driving. She's just gonna be hammered. She'll be passed out in the back seat on the drive up. No, but my mom works. She's like close to 70 years old. It's like I would say there's a strong chance. I'm gonna lose a lot of points with our 37 to 43-year-old listeners, but there's a strong chance if that game is not close in the fourth quarter, we're leaving at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Which, by the way, there might be other people leaving at the beginning of the fourth quarter. The way the season has gone and the way that game could go. The way I think everybody expects that game to go.
Yeah, it could be a rough one. We'll talk about it in just a second, and maybe more like commiserate about it. But that's another good topic. What else we got?
And then lastly, we've kind of devoted ourselves to spreading the Washington Huskies postseason talk across several weeks. And part of the reason is because this week there was another event that relates to the Huskies in the postseason, and that was Michael Penix Jr. losing the Heisman Trophy voting to Jayden Daniels, which I don't have a huge problem with, but I want to talk about with you because there's people that are very angry about it. But let's talk Ohtani first, if you're all right with that, because this is like, to me, it's a monumental event in baseball, and it goes beyond obviously the largest contract ever. That's huge. It's a free agent who is unprecedented in every way. Basically, since before free agency existed, there's never been a two-way player that was this good. Ohtani was a unanimous MVP, basically the best hitter in the league and a very good pitcher. At a different point in his career, he was one of the best pitchers in the league and a very good hitter. He's extremely valuable. He goes to the Dodgers on this deal. It's a $700 million contract, which already I was like, this is like when A-Rod signed the $252 million contract with Texas, where it was like it completely reset the baseline for free agency, not just the market for his position, which is something that every player wants to do. They want to slightly increase the value that the last big star at their position, and that's in football and baseball, that stuff. But it just completely changed free agency. And that is what happened with Alex Rodriguez. I would argue that the Ohtani contract is not going to have the same impact on average annual value of contracts. But we heard there's a lot of deferred money in this contract, and I assumed it was going to be like, of the $700 million, like $100 million was deferred, $200 million deferred. To find out that it's $680 million deferred is because, and also, so a couple things about this. There's been a lot of speculation that the Dodgers were trying to manipulate the competitive balance tax. That's not the way it's actually going to work out. They're going to get taxed. I think it's $46 million a year. So this is still going to, this contract on an annual basis is still going to cost them $48 million a year. They're giving Ohtani $2 million, and then they're going to be paying $46 million into the competitive balance tax. Is that right? Is that how that works? Or it just counts that much towards the competitive balance tax? They got to be at the very,
I'm going to trust you on that.
So they got to be at the very top tier. By the way, we're not fucking journalists. But the point is it's not really doing anything to get around the competitive balance tax. But what it is doing is, what's different from them signing him to a $46 million contract and then paying the tax, and them signing him to a deal where they only pay him $2 million, and then they pay that that $46 million tax based on whatever calculation is going on, is they're less. They don't have to pay that salary. That's like $44 million different. They can go spend that money on other players now. A team that's got already the most resources in baseball, but and I think even ahead of the Yankees at this point. I think their payroll has been higher, but I think even resource-wise, I think they actually have significantly more than the Yankees at this point. This completely exploits and undermines the point of these competitive balance measures that baseball has, in my opinion. But there's no reason for other players not to want to do this. This is great for Shohei Ohtani. It's a huge amount of money. By the way, he gets interest on the amount that he's deferred. So he's going to, He's going to make this into 2043, I believe. And it's great for the Dodgers because the Dodgers are a team that, because they are so valuable and because they have so many resources, and because they're in a metropolitan area where real estate is expensive and entertainment is expensive and all this stuff, they are one of the most valuable franchises in baseball. They run very little risk of not being able to pay that $700 million in an amount of time. And other cities simply cannot do that. This is not just raw money going out. This is not when I saw this deal before I knew about the deferral. I tweeted this. I never could believe I would be unhappy I would be happy the Mariners didn't sign Shohei Ohtani. That's so much money.
There's a lot there. It's like you said, it's one of the most unique contracts. It's probably the most unique contract in sports history, for a couple reasons. One, Shohei Ohtani is a unicorn. There's nobody like him. There's nobody else who, at any stage in the history of this game has shown that they can capably hit and pitch at the level that he has. There's been guys that have been two-way players. You can go back to Babe Ruth and, probably one of the most, the best examples of a really great pitcher, really great hitter, but he wasn't doing the two things at the same time. Shohei Ohtani's shown that he can do both at the same time. Now, for this next year, he won't be able to pitch because he had Tommy John surgery, but he can still keep hitting, which is great. His bat will be an asset to any lineup. So it was always going to be a very unique contract. I think the argument anybody else will be able to have, no one's going to have to go out and pay the next great shortstop or the next great pitcher $700 million because that player presumably will not be providing them the same value that Ohtani does on both sides of the ball as a pitcher and a hitter. So they'll always have this argument to be made. Teams can fire back at agents about that. So I think you're right. I mean, and even when citing the A-Rod deal, when he signed that money with Texas, while it reset the market, it didn't kick off this, all these monumental signings that were comparable to the $250 million 10-year contract he signed. There just weren't a lot like that. There weren't a lot of players of his caliber that were either hitting free agency around that time or didn't just command that amount. So, these big contracts like this, they can be unique in that they do reset the market in some ways, but not in others. So that's kind of one thing. And then two, like you said, the deferral of the way he kind of set up the financials of this contract would probably, there's a lot of financial planners out there that would probably lose their mind over the way this was done for many reasons on both sides. If you're Shohei Ohtani and you sign a $700 million contract and you don't take as much money as you possibly can as soon as you can, well, then you can't make money off that money, right? Just if you take a $70 million salary and throw it into a savings account, you're going to make a ton of money off that just in the interest you pull from that savings.
But he's getting it. I'm not sorry to interrupt. I know you let me fucking go for way too long, and I appreciate that. But he is getting interest on the deferred money. That's probably better than a savings account.
No, I definitely get it. I mean, beyond just a savings account, if you have all this money and can invest it in any myriad ways,
of course,
right?
Of course.
Then there's the potential to earn more on that than even what you would get in the interest off this by deferring it. So I think that could be maddening the way that he set that up. But at the same time, this guy's it's the true definition of setting yourself up for life. There's no possible way he can blow that money because he's not even going to get it for another decade. So most of that money that he's actually receiving for this contract is going to be when he's done playing baseball, unlike a lot of guys who have to go find another career, or get into broadcasting or whatever it might be. He doesn't have to do that if he doesn't want to. He can just live comfortably off this deferred contract for really the rest of his life if he wants to.
If it was only $460 million, he definitely would have been. He'd had to get a job bagging groceries or something. But
well, and then one of the interesting things I saw about his contract is California has a huge tax, right? A huge income tax. So if he got all of his money up front the way he's supposed to each year, he'd basically be taxed on half of that, living in California. But if he were to finish his playing career and then say move back to Japan or move somewhere else that doesn't have the same
Seattle,
type of,
for example,
like here, because you don't have an income tax here. If he were to move somewhere that doesn't have an income tax like California does after his playing days are over, as he starts receiving those paychecks from the Dodgers, he's not going to have to pay that same amount of tax. So in a lot of ways, he's actually making more than he would if he was taking that money in. So it benefits both sides in a lot of ways. I don't think a lot of players would have the financial ability to do what he did. I think a lot of guys, luckily for Ohtani, he's made a lot of money already, but a lot of guys, even if they've made a lot of money, they might live a lifestyle that they have to keep up, right? And he's only taking $2 million a year for the next few years, so next 10 years, I guess. That's not, for a lot of these guys, that's not a lot of money. And to be able to sustain your lifestyle off that when you're used to living a certain way, that can be difficult. So the fact that he was able to do that, I think, is unique, and I don't think you would see a ton of players deferring a contract like that. I do think, the point that you made at the end about being glad the Mariners didn't invest that type of money, I don't think there were more than 2 or 3 teams in baseball that could even conceive paying a baseball player that much money. That's just not something that's there for most teams. So I never really thought the Mariners had a chance as Ohtani's value continued to go up over the last couple of years. When we first heard about Ohtani, when he first came over to the States, and the thought was he might very well be a Mariner, everyone was excited about the potential for a two-way player, but that was before we really knew what this guy could do. And even his first couple of years playing for the Angels were rocky. I mean, he wasn't healthy very often. He was like an okay hitter, not a great hitter. When he was pitching, you could tell he had the potential to be a great pitcher, but I remember there being talk about, because of his issues, because he can't stay healthy, maybe he'd be better as a reliever or maybe just a hitter. And over the last couple of seasons, I mean, this dude really showed up when it was time. Mm-hmm. When it was time to show up, his value could really not be any higher. I mean, I guess if he hadn't had the arm injury this year and had to miss a year of pitching, then that would certainly elevate his value, and who knows how much he would have got then. But as it stands, I mean, his value is about as high as it could ever be. So to invest in an asset at its peak, everyone would say that's a bad idea, right? Like at this point, he can only decline, and the end of that contract will certainly be unfavorable, I would have to think. If he has shown with the injury history he's shown so far, you would have to think that would only get worse as he ages. Maybe we're wrong about that, but it seems like that would be something that would be risky at the back end of this deal. But what do the Dodgers care, man? There's talks about the finances of what they'll make in ad revenue or just make off of him and his likeness because he's the Michael Jordan of Japan. So there was money to be made off him, regardless of what you were going to pay him. But I generally agree with you. It's probably a good idea that the Mariners and a lot of other teams in baseball did not invest that type of capital in one guy.
But so yeah, I think like if the Mariners had paid him, so that the prevailing wisdom right now, based on inflation and all that stuff, is that the deal, time value of money, all that bullshit, is worth actually something like 10 years, $460 million in present day dollars.
Sure.
And that's where we get to this $46 million competitive balance tax figure. So couple things about it is, because of this, because the Dodgers now have more to spend, talent concentrates even further into Los Angeles. That's bad for everybody that's not a Dodgers fan. It's fine it's great for Ohtani, because let's say the Mariners gave him 10 years, $460 million. Or let's say a team did. That's all great for Ohtani. He's obviously, there's no motivation for players to not take deals like this. I have to imagine this has to be one of the first deals of this magnitude of its type ever proposed. I can't even imagine like the Mike Trout deal or whatever was ever, something like this was ever floated. Like you said, maybe part of it is because Ohtani's already made a bunch of money in his career. Maybe part of it is because it's like this, to me, it feels very exploitative of the rules. And so maybe no team has had the guts to do it. And I think part of the deal is like Major League Baseball, the organization, works for the owners, which is something that I think is very obvious in something like this. They don't work for us, the fans. They work for the owners. The owners have this like chummy relationship, right? Where they're like, there's a lot of politics involved, where them trying to fight against a deal like this means that somewhere down the road, they may not be able to get their, some deal they want. So this, to me, it feels like the kind of deal that is only bad for the fans. This only hurts the fans of baseball who are going to see basically another 2 stars worth of salary be able to go to the Dodgers. So again, talent will be concentrated there more. Also, by the way, we have no idea what this stuff's going to look like in 10 years. The Dodgers are like maybe 2 or 3 CBAs down the road when this these deferrals start to kick in, that might not even count towards there may be a one-time exception because the Dodgers want it because they're very powerful at that moment because they're bringing in so much revenue to baseball. And it is good for baseball to have a guy like Shohei Ohtani in a market like Los Angeles. It's good for baseball overall, for the revenue of baseball. But for baseball fans, for you and me, this is not a good day. Like, you know what I mean? And
Well,
it's not just
no,
because he went to not the Mariners. If he signs with Toronto, I have no problem with this deal because Toronto's a mid-market team like most teams in baseball.
it's bad for fans of specific teams. I would agree with you, but I don't think it's bad for baseball, and I don't think it's bad for the generic fan. And I'll give you an example. There's two things. One, we've seen this work with the NBA. This is the NBA's model. The NBA's model is to concentrate all the stars in a few different markets and let, 4 or 5 teams battle it out every year to prove who's the best. And the other 25 are getting left behind, right? Like that's kind of the model that they've chosen to operate with. It kind of started with the super teams 15 years ago, and it's just kind of taken off from there. It's never really gone away. And I think part of the reason why they know the NBA knows that model works, and now Major League Baseball is starting to understand that model can work, is because you draw in the casual fans from places that either don't have a team or just don't have a very strong fan base. That's the thing about the NBA. After we lost the Sonics for a few years there, I really had no interest in watching the NBA. But when you saw the rise of the Warriors, when you saw LeBron go to the Heat and then back to the Cavs and kind of make those teams very good, I generally had interest in watching that stuff again, where I might not have had that before. And I think that model worked. I'm not a fan of the Warriors. I'm not a fan of the Heat or the Cavs, but you're a fan of seeing the best players on the best teams. It's why we actually tune into like all-star games and stuff when they can be very boring, right?
You do.
Well, we just like watching the best players. And I think it sucks. You're right. It sucks for fans like us who are a fan of a team like the Mariners, who will be under this model more likely to be a have not than a have. But it's kind of the reality of the way.
How many halves do you think there's going to be, though? Like,
not many.
To me, this is a thing where it's no longer the resources that you have on hand. It's no longer the budget that you have on hand. These teams are now operating like tech startups where they're just leveraging the shit out of their debt till like they're just kicking this can down the road, right? Like they're basically taking a loan out on his talent from Shohei Ohtani, and it's just, to me, it's like, it's different from the NBA because the NBA has a salary cap and it's fucked. It's got problems also. Don't get me wrong. I would prefer an uncapped league. This specific type of transaction where this team gets to send almost $750 million to 10 years from now and then just keep acquiring talent today, that is not good for the competitive balance of baseball. To me, that is a major gap with everything baseball has done in the last 20 years to make sure small market teams can compete. And it's done, by the way, a better job than basketball by far. Not that it's improved their popularity, but I don't think that's what's to blame for baseball's lack of popularity. I don't know what the answer is, by the way, but I don't think it's that.
I think that's part of it for baseball. I mean,
you think because there's no super teams?
Yeah, I do. I think because here's the thing:
crazy.
like when the Arizona Diamondbacks made the World Series this year, and they were facing the Rangers, a casual fan wouldn't care about that matchup because think of who is the biggest superstar on the Rangers and who's the biggest superstar on the Diamondbacks. They don't have any household names. The Rangers have a lot of great players. If you're a really big baseball fan, you know that Marcus Semien and Corey Seager are great ball players, but they're not Mike Trout. They're not Shohei Ohtani. The same thing can be said for the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks don't really have anybody of note right now. Corbin Carroll is a really good player. He was an all-star. He was a rookie of the year. Nobody knows who that is if you're a casual fan. We know because he's from Seattle, and we know because we like baseball. But when you are a casual NBA fan and you know who Steph Curry is and you know who LeBron is and you know Draymond Green and you know Klay Thompson and you know when those teams are going, people are more likely to tune in. That's what a league is looking for. They're not, they want to draw in the casual fan more than they want to draw in the hardcore fan, because the hardcore fan is always going to be there. For as much as we might not like Shohei Ohtani going to the Dodgers, we're still going to keep watching baseball. For as much as the Mariners suck and tell us they're not going to spend, well, don't tell us they're not going to spend money on free agents, but show us they're not going to do that, we're still going to watch Mariner games because we're hardcore baseball fans. That's what we do. And those are the type of people that they don't have to appeal to. A league doesn't have to appeal to that person. Now, you can get yourselves in such a bad position that you start to lose those people. But if you get to that point, you might be screwed anyway. And I don't think MLB or the NBA or the NFL is worried about getting to that point, because they've been pretty stable for a long time. But what they're all trying to do is just draw in more fans from that casual market. And the model of having the Yankees be really good, getting Juan Soto and just building that team up, the Dodgers being really good, they've got exactly what they want now. They have one team on each coast that is a super team, that they happen to be in different leagues, which is great. One AL, one NL. It's exactly what they want. I mean, the MLB's dream World Series matchup is Dodgers-Yankees. That would be everything they could possibly want. They'd have both coasts involved. They'd have two of the highest spending teams involved. And it's like, if you can show, I mean, the one nice thing about the Rangers making the World Series and winning it last year is that this was a team that spent a ton of money to build that roster. And watching that expensive roster have success, if you're MLB, that's in some ways ideal for you, you know?
Yeah, so I guess like I get what you're saying, and I understand how that's good for Major League Baseball's revenue.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is I think it marks, and I think we might be saying something like the same thing. It marks a shift away from the game as it was. Like this is what I'm saying. I think it's a monumental change. I think for me, it's going to be a net negative, this deal. Of course, there might be, I mean, eventually these games probably all going to be played on a sound stage in Los Angeles anyway, with no fans in attendance, because we need more cameras and hard drives to hold slow motion video. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing at this point? If that's the deal, if we're no longer going to have regional fan bases, if that's no longer going to be important, or if every team in sports is just now the Washington Generals, and the Washington Generals happen to play in my city, so occasionally I get to see the Globetrotters come, like that. I understand this isn't exactly how the Harlem Globetrotters work, by the way, but I'm saying, like, if the if the Mariners are the Washington Generals, and the appeal is every now and then I get to see the Washington Generals play the Dodgers, that sucks. Like, that is a dog shit league that I will not care about as much anymore. And by the way, like, again, I don't know what the answer is. It might just be where I'm an old man, where my dad has a problem with college football being the way it is, and I'm like, this is like progress, even though I recognize that I think college football is going to change in a way that's going to make it to some degree less enjoyable for someone like you and I to watch. Baseball, I feel like coming out of this, if what you're saying is true, is going to be unrecognizable, and it's going to be like the way that my daughter consumes baseball is going to be so much different from the way you and I did. And I don't think the way that I consumed baseball was that much different from the way my dad did. I mean, maybe I consumed it from like a stat perspective, but not like every team in the league sucks except for two, and we're just watching those two teams every year.
Well, I mean, I guess the reason to be optimistic is that the opposite strategy works in the NFL. And it might just be because of the salary cap, but obviously in the NFL, you have a lot of parity and a lot of turnover. It's tough to be a super team in the NFL. But the NBA has found that model doesn't work for them. You know, the NBA has found that having the super team model is better for their bottom line for whatever reason. And I
actually think baseball, sorry to cut you off one more time.
No problem.
I think baseball has a thing the NFL has, which is careers they vary a lot in length. And these contracts have become very long. So very often we'll see a guy who's in the fourth year of a 10-year deal struggling, and then struggles till the end of that contract, right? And that's what we would probably see in the NFL if guys were signed to 10-year deals that were guaranteed. And baseball doesn't have a salary cap, but they do have some restrictions on how much you can spend. So that is the one thing that, again, but the thing that is that the competitive balance tax and all that stuff is being circumvented here. This is like, to me, this is a contract. If they don't make a rule against this, the owners are in cahoots. They're all fucking greedy billionaires, it turns out, like I've always said. And John Stanton was the only good one, I guess. So that's his name, right? John Stanton. I fucking
yeah, it's John Stanton. No,
all right.
I think for MLB, they've just been kind of caught in the middle of, the NBA has a business model, the NFL has a business model. Both their models seem to work for them, even though they're kind of in, direct conflict with one another. They're completely opposite. And MLB just kind of floats along. They don't really have a direction as far as how they want to do things. And in some ways that's really good. I mean, they really allow a free market to act on its own and kind of dictate how, no one's pulling the strings and dictating how the market should behave in MLB, which in a lot of ways, if you're a fan, is exactly how you should want your league to be, right? Because it leaves open the possibility for anything, and there's no one puppeteering this entire thing behind the scenes. Yeah. Because you could make that argument about NBA a little bit, as they kind of dictate how things go. MLS. Now, I know we're not really soccer fans, but I know enough about MLS to know that they do this a lot too. They've definitely orchestrated some of the big soccer players from overseas going to certain MLS teams, which is kind of messed up. If it was a bigger sport, there'd be probably more of an outcry about it.
Yeah, and well, I'm sure there is. Just you and I are right.
Shattered from it. Yeah, it's just, it doesn't get talked about as much in general sports fan circles because it's more of a niche sport. But it's a little messed up that they would kind of dictate those things, sure. Right? And baseball's never really done that. For as much as they've, because you don't have the salary cap, and granted you do have luxury tax, if you're the Yankees and you have all the money in the world, spend it however you want. If you choose to go crazy on veteran free agents, you can absolutely do that and no one's going to stop you. And I think in a lot of ways that's it. MLB is most reflective of a capitalistic society compared to any of these other leagues in a lot of ways. And that's kind of nice, but it'll be interesting to see like what happens in the aftermath of this deferred deal. I understand all of your qualms with the deference of the deal and how it could provide a competitive advantage to the Dodgers or any other team that tries to pull this off with a free agent in the future. I joked that now that the Mariners know you can do this, which I'm guessing they might not have before, they're going to try to do this with everybody. Even
I don't think anyone knew, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if this was something you could always do and they just happened to find a loophole, or if this was something that got approved for them. I mean, that's probably not something we'll necessarily find out. But It happened, and it was allowed. So here we are, and now it's like one of those things where you've opened Pandora's box in a way, but who knows if people will actually want to take advantage of it. Like I said earlier, I don't think there's a lot of players that have the financial means to just be able to say, defer 95% of my salary. What do I care? I'll pick it up later. There's just too many guys out there that need that money now.
I think what it's done is really solidify and really galvanize the fact that there's two strategies. And like it or not, the Mariners aren't going to be able to compete in the free agent market. That's the deal. Like, you could complain about them not spending money. If the free agent market is like this, there's like 4 teams that can really compete for the top talent. And I'm putting it at like the New York Yankees, probably not even the Mets, considering the financial concerns they've had over the years. The Chicago Cubs, maybe. The Dodgers. And then, I mean, who's the 4th team? Maybe it's only 3 teams that can really compete in some shit like this. And the Cubs might not be able to either, because this is the other thing about baseball, by the way, that's different from those other sports. Basketball, by the way, makes about $10 billion a year. Baseball, $10 billion. Football, $18 billion. These are not surprising numbers. Baseball makes a lot more of their money than those other sports on regular season in-person attendance than any of those other sports.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. I mean, baseball is a sport that you think about as like more of a social gathering than the other ones. If you're going to a football game or a basketball game, more often than not, you're really going to focus on the game. But a lot of people that go to baseball games are just there to have a good time.
But also like the TV ratings are down. Like, that's true. That is true.
Well, that's another thing.
And by the way, even the last time the Dodgers were in the World Series, it wasn't like they were fucking world-beating TV ratings. They were better than last year, obviously, but...
Yeah, I mean, the TV model is another thing that's going to, I think this is where baseball is really in limbo. I mean, we saw it happen. We've talked about it mid-season when MLB basically had to assume control of the San Diego Padres broadcasts. And now, as this offseason has kind of rolled along, it's kind of been a more of a back burner story, but other teams have been facing financial issues with their regional sports networks. And so this whole model seems to be collapsing, which it's not a great model to begin with because it's tied so heavily to cable companies that
Yeah.
if you want to watch a baseball game in a lot of cities, you have to subscribe to like a Comcast cable package, which frankly, a lot of people, and especially people of a younger demographic, do not do anymore because
Yeah.
it's too expensive and there are just other better ways to watch TV now. And so the model is going to collapse if it's tied to cable, certainly. And I think that's another thing that baseball has to kind of figure out is what are they going to do with broadcast going forward? Because it's prohibitively hard to watch a baseball game if you're a fan of a certain team. It just is. Like,
Hmm.
there are people who will make the argument for RSNs and the cable packages that they represent and all of that sort of thing. And I understand because somebody at the top is making money off you defending them. But the reality is, it's so much easier to watch a football game, even a basketball game, than it is a baseball game. And if baseball wants to improve viewership, there's a very easy way to do that. And it's just by making it easier to access the games on TV.
I
And
fully
that's
agree
not,
with that. There's no doubt in
they've
my mind.
worked against that. They've been the opposite there. They've been trying to create barriers to profit off people
Yeah.
watching their games on TV. And you can profit off people watching on TV through ads and things like that. But baseball, they do it in the laziest way. They just say we're basically going to make you pay more to watch our baseball games on TV, and that's a lot of people just aren't willing to do that anymore. Maybe back, when cable was the only option, they certainly were, but now it's just so much tougher to get
I
people.
know. I know. Yeah, it just feels like a time where baseball is transforming in a way that I don't think is good. And I understand there's like ways that it's good and ways that I'm probably a little bit of chicken little on this,
Yeah,
but I think it's also like, I mean, today is the day. Or this deal to me represents a shift where there's like none of the safeguards that are supposed to keep teams on something like a level playing field worked. It's technically within the rules, obviously. I don't, but I also think like what owner is going to protest? Because and what this reminds me of, by the way, and I'm too stupid to actually like reference this, but have you heard those stories about like Warren Buffett or Elon Musk? They borrow against their own assets instead of selling their assets, so they don't have to pay capital gains tax. They borrow to themselves for like 0% interest, and that's
yeah,
what they have instead of income. It's just such a an exploit that most people, and in the case of Major League Baseball, we're talking about like literal billionaires who don't have
yeah,
the financial wherewithal to do this thing. And if the billionaire that owns your team can't do this financial thing, that's bad news for baseball. If like the probably one of the richest people in your region can't also do this thing, it's going to be really tough for. I mean, but also Shohei Ohtani is the best player in baseball. But if we
yeah. I
start
mean,
seeing this on other deals, it's going to be, I think, particularly.
yeah, it's like racking up credit card debt, but doing it on players that you sign. I mean, it's in time it can burn you, but I
It's
do
like
think
racking
it's
up credit card debt in someone else's name on the fucking credit card. That's the thing. It's
it's
like
yeah.
the
Well,
fans that have to pay for the fans whose ticket prices are going to go up are 10 years from now. You know what I mean? Like the people who are fans of the Dodgers, even that in 10 years that ticket is going to be harder to afford because they're spending $68 million on a player that's not there anymore.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it's one of those things that I guess theoretically you could see teams do this with every free agent they sign down the road, but I don't think that'll happen. I think it's going to be the wealthiest teams and the wealthiest players that maybe assume this strategy, if they can even agree to assume this strategy, like, knowing that so many players will want their money immediately. And, at the same time, it's just for baseball. I mean, you don't see a ton of free agents anymore. Like, just in general, as we were talking about a minute ago, like a lot of these teams sign their players to long-term contracts earlier and earlier so that they don't have to get to this point. It's rare.
Sure.
I think it's going to become increasingly rarer where you see like great free agent crops like we saw last year with the shortstops. And when you do
That's
see
probably true.
those free agent crops, it's guys who are approaching 30, like Otani is now, who are going to sign what are basically bad contracts for the team in the long run, knowing, it's like when the Mariners signed Robinson Cano and everybody was like, wow, this contract is going to get terrible at the end. And it did, because you just, that's the price of doing business now with big free agents, is that you're paying a 30-year-old to basically perform for a couple years, knowing that the last half of a deal, from ages 35 to 40, it's going to be just god awful for you unless you can somehow offload this guy in a trade somehow.
Yeah.
The way that the Mariners somehow managed to do. But
Best trade of Jerry DiPoto's career.
It isn't it. At the same time, though, a lot of people look at that contract and say, God, that was a terrible contract. Why would we do it? And it's like, well, you have to do that to keep up with the other teams. It's just the reality. Ohtani is probably not going to be a good player for all 10 years of that contract. Albert Pujols was not good for all 10 years of the mega contract he signed with the Angels, over a decade ago now. Sure. It's what you have to do.
I think the mistake the Mariners made at that time was not signing Robinson Cano. Because you were entering the last couple years of Felix Hernandez being a very good pitcher, which the writing was on the wall, by the way. His velocity was going down. His effectiveness was going down. Like, he was getting worse as a pitcher. And to me, what they did wrong was, in that moment, I think, or maybe even a year or two earlier, you either trade Felix or really go all in. And it's crazy to say that signing a player to the largest contract in team history to that point, and probably still, right? I don't think the Julio deal has could be 500,000 or could be 500 million, could be 12 million.
The Mariners can do their own unique contracts.
That's fair. That's
crazy
fair.
Escalators to it. Yeah. No, it's, I get what you're saying. And now it's like,
I feel like they needed to keep pushing. That wasn't the last move. That wasn't the last move for a championship team. That was the first move for a championship team.
That's the story of the Mariners.
Yeah, of course. They're always making the first move their last move.
They don't know what they're doing. I mean, they're a haphazard organization. They're
agree.
Poorly run. They're just poorly run. And I think that's what you see with a lot of,
but I don't think not signing Ohtani is an example of that, by the way. People are depressed about that, I think, a little bit, although I think other people, I've actually seen a lot of reasonable opinions on it, but I don't think not signing Ohtani is any evidence of that, because this is a contract it's just fraught for a team that's in the Mariners' mid-market status, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, a team like the Mariners is not going to be signing anybody like Ohtani. That Cano contract is kind of more of an anomaly than anything at this point. Sure. You're just not going to see guys like that coming to Seattle if Seattle isn't willing to spend money with those big teams, and they haven't shown the penchant for doing that. So, man, it's just it. And I think Seattle is going to be more representative of most baseball teams going forward than the Dodgers will be, which I don't know, man. You can feel how you want about that. If you're a fan of a certain team that is getting left behind, I'm sure it sucks, but yeah.
I am, and it sucks. Yes.
Yeah, well, let's talk about a different team that makes us depressed. Maybe we can move to the old Seattle Seahawks.
So, it's tough because the Seahawks have lost 4 in a row. There was a point in this season where it seemed somewhat likely that they would be a playoff team, and now their chances are severely diminished. And not only are the chances diminished, but I don't think there's a lot of hope on the horizon. On Sunday, I was pretty happy with what I saw out of Drew Lock. To me, I've kind of had this feeling since Drew Lock came to Seattle and competed with Geno Smith that the gap between him and Geno Smith wasn't that large. Frankly, I think he showed that on Sunday. I don't know what you do about that. You still have the big Geno Smith cap number no matter what you do in 2024. I don't know that means you move on from Geno Smith. In fact, maybe it's an argument to keep Geno Smith and not have Drew Lock be the backup. He's not better than Geno Smith. I don't think he showed that he's better than Geno Smith. Where do you stand on that specific discussion, by the way, the Geno Smith, Drew Lock? Because that's a thing. There's people out there that give him the rest of the year. I'm sick of Geno. And I'm like, anyways.
Yeah. Drew Lock looked a lot better in his start than I think anybody thought he would.
Sure.
He goes into San Francisco against the 49ers, which they've been the hottest team in football lately. It's tough to start a game on the road anywhere. And you're facing arguably the best defense in the NFL. That's not exactly a soft landing for a guy making his first start in a few years. And he looked great. I mean, he looked pretty great for most of the game. It faded in the fourth quarter, but that's the difference between a good team and a bad team. You watch teams in the NFL. I mean, I've watched the Panthers are 1-12 or whatever they are. I've watched them play a few times just by accident in some ways, and I was also at a game. But the thing about watching a bad team in the NFL, the thing about watching any bad team in the NFL is for 3/4 of the game, most of the time they look like a decent team. They're keeping pace, and it's really just in the fourth quarter where things fall apart. That's what happened to the Seahawks against the Niners, and things didn't go their way. So it's really hard. I mean, Geno at least has proven that he can start and finish a game. And that's something you need in a quarterback. You need a quarterback that's not going to fade down the stretch. I don't, going into last season, I don't think the Seahawks ever envisioned themselves being in this position in 2023, where they had a clear starting quarterback among the two options they had in 2022, and they had a clear backup, and yet somehow felt good about both those guys, right?
Sure.
Because coming into this year, they felt good about Geno Smith as their starter, and they felt good about Drew Lock as their backup. That was clear. Now I think they're going to have to reevaluate things, because I would have to imagine going into 2022, if we're being honest, they thought, okay, one of these two guys is going to be a bridge quarterback, and then in 2023 we're going to draft one of the many good quarterbacks that are coming out: CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, any of those guys that were available there to be taken. And they didn't have to do that this year, because Geno proved he was good enough that you don't have to go reinvest all your money in a first-round draft pick quarterback, or any highly drafted quarterback. So they were able to kind of shift course. But now I think they're going to have to shift course again going into 2024, because they haven't. Neither one of these guys has shown that they are capable of being a starter for the long term, and that's the problem that you're looking at with the Seahawks. And beyond just the quarterback position, I mean, man, the Seahawks have just had problems across the board. Obviously, Jamal Adams has been. We didn't even talk about Jamal Adams last week and his social media breakdown, but
let's talk about that, because that's to me, his on-field play has been obvious to Seahawks fans for a long time, that he's whatever. I think his and I was guilty when that happened, when that trade happened too, in a similar way to when Robinson Cano got signed, because I felt like the end of Russell Wilson's career in Seattle was coming, and this was like trading for Jamal Adams was pushing all your chips in to win one more before Pete Carroll was gone. And now Pete Carroll's still here, Jamal Adams is still here, Russell Wilson's gone, and it feels like Pete's going to coach for the next 5 years. And you're like, well, fuck then. Why'd you make that stupid trade? Like, if it wasn't, if
Yeah, Jamal Adams is basically like a shitty franchise quarterback right now. He's the guy that's playing terribly and collecting a huge chunk of salary. And if you have any of those guys who are just anchors on your team and commanding a lot of salary in the NFL, it's going to be tough to overcome that, regardless of the position. But he makes so much money and has been, I think up till this point, he hasn't been the best player, but the out he's always had is that he's just unhealthy, right? So it's like, in some ways that's terrible, but it's tough to make fun of a guy who's getting hurt all the time, because just inherently you feel a little bit bad about that. Even if he is like making a ton of money and just not available, you're like, well, if he was healthy, he'd be really good. Now we've seen whether Jamal Adams considers himself healthy or not at this point. He's been playing enough recently that we have to assume he's healthy, right? And what we've seen is very bad. And for Jamal Adams, I mean, man, he's getting roasted on social media, decides to take it out on some innocent New York reporter's wife, of all things, which, okay, objectively, he made fun of this woman, and he posted a picture of her and said, yikes. That's all he did. Most people know by now.
Yeah, so it starts out, by the way, the reporter said yikes at him getting fucking destroyed by the Cowboys tight end, getting essentially getting his ankles broken. Yeah,
getting burned for the game-winning touchdown in that Cowboy game. So yeah, you're right. It's the reporter. All he says is yikes on a video of Jamal Adams looking bad. It wasn't even the reporter's video. He's just quote tweeting it, saying yikes. Jamal does the same thing back to him, says yikes, but it's over a picture of this guy's wife. Now, again, objectively, the joke doesn't even work, because this woman is not ugly. I'm not saying that this is the right thing to do. It's certainly not the right thing to make fun of people like that for their looks at all. But if she wasn't attractive, at least there would be some like horrible people that would maybe support Jamal. But when you go through the replies to the tweet, there were people that were like the shitty people were just confused by it. Like there were replies that were like, should we know who this person is? Like in the
Yeah.
picture? Like they couldn't figure it out. They're like, we want to support you, but we don't know what the joke is you're trying
We
to
like
make.
hurting people, but we don't know.
But
We don't
why
know
are
who
we
we're
hurting this one? Yeah, exactly. It's like if she was like very unattractive, they would kind of get like what he was getting at with his
Right.
like with his joke, I guess, if you want to call it that. But the joke didn't work. So if you're just a fan of humor, you're like, man, not only is this guy kind of stupid, but he's not funny either.
Yeah.
So like Jamal Adams made himself the most unlikable guy in sports for a week, which is putting the focus squarely on him. So going into this game against San Francisco, now everyone wants to watch Jamal Adams because he's made himself the focal point. And what
Yeah.
does he do in the first quarter? He whiffs on a tackle early in the game against Christian McCaffrey, just kind of whiffs on the tackle altogether. And then minutes later, Deebo Samuel absolutely torches him for a touchdown where Jamal is on an island, waits about 2 seconds too late to turn his hips and run after the receiver, streaking by him to the end zone unobstructed, who then catches a touchdown pass. So that's really all you need to see. There's other plays in there where he looked bad or didn't do what he was supposed to, made some business decisions on tackles where he didn't really go all out, which is not what you'd expect from a guy who kind of prides himself on being that type of player. And on top of everything else, I mean, he's a salary anchor at this point. He's hurting the team in so many ways, and there's just not a lot you can do about that. So even if you don't think he's a complete asshole for acting the way he does on social media, you probably don't like him because his play hasn't been good. And even if you don't think his play is that bad, you probably don't like him because he's making too much money. So in every facet of possibility, he has made himself unlikable in this past week.
Yeah, I've found this year really interesting to watch him try to be a leader on the team. And maybe that's something that the coaching staff is asking of him. Maybe that's something that they like about him. But it's really interesting to me because it's like he's basically not been there for the vast majority of the last 2 years. And the way NFL rosters churn, like most of these guys probably are not super familiar with him as a teammate. They might be really aware of how good he was at LSU or kind of he had the year in Seattle where he was probably still not a very good player, but he sacked quarterbacks a bunch of times and we got all excited about that. And those were fun to watch. I mean, he's a guy who is a safety from a bygone era. His style of play just does not work in the NFL anymore. Not unlike, by the way, like I think that were it not for the era changing, Felix Hernandez maybe squeezes out a couple other extra years. The Seahawks zigged when everyone else was zagging, and sometimes that's really good. This time they zigged into a fucking ditch. You know what I mean? Like it was a style mistake. It was a valuation mistake. He's I think he is the athlete that everyone thought he was. Maybe if he's 250 pounds, he might be a great linebacker. In the modern NFL, he has no position. And so he's an overpaid guy that's just never going to be good. And that's the thing is everything he's struggling at is the stuff he was bad at as a rookie, is the stuff he was bad at in New York, is the stuff he was bad at early in his Seahawks career. And it's the stuff he's going to stay bad at for the rest of his career. Maybe some team can scheme him into a productive role. But I mean, it's like, what is he, a defensive end? Like, I don't know what role that is at this point.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways, it's like when the Seahawks acquired Percy Harvin. They had this guy that's like unquestionably a great athlete. Like you watch him play and you're like, man, this guy might be the fastest guy on the field, but on top of that, he's one of the strongest guys on the field. And it's like, if you can just get the ball in his hands, he's going to make plays happen. And on the defensive side, Jamal Adams is a lot like that. You watch him run around the field at times and you're like, man, this guy is explosive. He's super quick. He can get to the quarterback seemingly whenever he wants. But he can't do the basics of the position. He can't cover guys, which even if you're like a strong safety, I know, you're going to expect your free safety to play a little bit more coverage, but even Cam Chancellor could cover some guys. He can at least cover a tight end for you sometimes, like he can do a little bit. He's not just out there hitting people hard. Jamal Adams has so much trouble in coverage. And as the NFL has evolved, it's like they almost brought Jamal Adams in to be like a guy who works against the run or maybe attacks the quarterback like a defensive end or a linebacker, like you said. but teams just throw on the Seahawks. It's like
Right.
you're asking him to play a position in a league that is just throw dominant and he can't cover anybody. So it really doesn't matter how explosive he is or how hard he hits a guy. If he can't stop the pass, he's kind of useless in your
It's
defense.
like having the best fullback in the NFL today. Like, it's not a useful position anymore the way he plays it. And
Right.
also, by the way, Quandre Diggs, Jordan Love, Devin Witherspoon. The three positions this dude might play, the two safety spots, which I think both those guys are better in coverage than he is. Maybe neither one of them is as good against the run, but again, not as important. Devin Witherspoon, significantly better in coverage, can play the nickelback also. You look at like yes, Cam could cover running backs and tight ends. Earl Thomas as a safety was a guy that could come up and essentially play nickelback as an elite nickelback these were like great defensive backs. And Jamal Adams, if you just take that guy, strip away all the college prestige, strip away the draft pick, all that stuff, he's just free agent with his skills, or a guy who's at the combine from a small school and you're watching tape. I feel like that dude has just no spot in the NFL today.
Well, he had just a lot. Anytime you have guys with name recognition that come along with them, it's like when the Seahawks picked up Jadeveon Clowney. That's another good example of a guy who's like, this guy's been on everyone's radar since he was in high school,
Right.
and there's this reputation that kind of precedes them and gives them an excuse to like not always be at their best, right? Like Jadeveon Clowney was, by all accounts, I would say probably a disappointment here, but he still keeps getting like 1-year contracts everywhere he goes. And I think a lot of those contracts are based on the idea of him rather than what you've actually seen him do. Because if he was some no-name guy who was putting up the same numbers, he's probably not getting the deals or hanging around as long as he has. And I think Jamal Adams will probably end up being one of those guys too, after he's done with the Seahawks, which, that time seems to be getting nearer and nearer. But in general, for all of the issues Jamal has had and what we were just talking about with the quarterback, I think all of it just kind of coalesces, and it's like this team just really has no identity and no leadership. Even when the Seahawks were at their best, or even on the decline of being at their best, they still had a lot of guys in place who were able to kind of control the locker room and keep everything in check, so that regardless of what's going on, if one guy's having injured or having a bad day or whatever, the rest of the team around him can pick it up. That just doesn't seem to be the case anymore with the Seahawks as they're constructed now. And I think you have a lot of guys like Jamal who just aren't playing well. You have guys like DK who are kind of like fake leaders. They act up so much during games that no one's they might respect them because they're good players, but they're not going to necessarily respect them as a leader in the way that you might have respected, a Richard Sherman or an Earl Thomas or a Marshawn Lynch in the past, right? And the guys that they do have who have kind of been stalwarts of the locker room, at least as far as we know, guys like Tyler Lockett, Bobby Wagner, they're just getting up there. They're not the same players they once were, and they're towards the end of the line. And generally, as you kind of get older in any realm, it's like, even if you're very well respected for what you do, you might take a backseat to others, you might defer to others, you might kind of relinquish some of that leadership that you've had in the past. Also, Lockett and Wagner, even though they were part of some of those great Seahawks teams, they're not really looked at as like the most vocal leaders by comparison to some of the others. So I think asking them to be those figureheads now could be really tough. And it seems like the Seahawks are kind of in a transition phase as a result. It's like, are some of these guys the right fit for this team moving forward, or will they even be here by the time the team gets good enough to make it relevant? Who knows, it's kind of a weird phase. I don't think for a long time we've seen this with the Seahawks.
The DK situation's interesting. Real quick, I want to say 3:45 I got to leave. So home run game done for the year. That's what I'm calling it. Alex won. He's the 2023 home run game champion. We're going to start back up with it in 2024, maybe, if we continue to do the podcast. It's always a risk.
Once baseball season hits, it's a good game. It's not as relevant during
That's true. Okay, so DK Metcalf is tremendous athlete, has been tremendously productive in Seattle, has also, by the way, you just kind of felt like there's some untapped potential there too, because he's such an amazing athlete. There's a little bit of, I would say, and it's not just the physique, though that helps. there's a little bit of a David Boston thing going on where it's like DK Metcalf, so he definitely has a big ego on the field. And there's guys that I love that have enormous egos. Richard Sherman had an enormous ego, but Richard Sherman showed up in crunch time all the time. Richard Sherman, by the way, there's many examples of Richard Sherman getting burned. It's not like Richard Sherman never had a bad moment on a football field, but that dude, his head was in the game all the time. Did Richard Sherman ever get ejected from a game, I wonder? And certainly not for...
I don't remember it. Yeah, if it happened, I don't recall.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this kind of thing, these anger, fighting type of things from DK Metcalf a lot. And I'm not like so naive to think that this is baby brain, dude. The Seahawks need to bench him. He's still, if you're gonna be a playoff team in 2023, it's probably gonna be with significant contributions from DK Metcalf. I'm not saying they bench him, but I do think as you're evaluating a guy like that going into next year, you kind of got to look at like what are we trading off on a weekly basis? The penalties, the guy's going to end the year with probably 1,300 yards, double-digit touchdowns maybe. But what is the trade-off? What the yards and penalties? And not only penalties, but sometimes penalties in absolutely crucial spots. I'll say on Sunday, he seemed to mostly keep his cool until the game was completely out of contention. So that's, for me,
which is that's a staple of Seahawks teams. You know, remember like in the Michael Bennett era, like when the other team was in victory formation, the Seahawks defensive line would always start shit.
They would always be assholes.
It's like, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are like, you should lose with grace and win with grace. And it's like, that's just not this team. But They were winning more often than they lost, so everyone could deal with it. Now, when you're losing more than you're winning, those types of blowups they're not as acceptable. I think what's frustrating with DK Metcalf or anybody like DK Metcalf, you know, if you ever played sports growing up, there's probably people you knew who are like this too, that just physically, they're just so talented. And you look at them and you're like, man, if you just had your head on straight, you would produce all the time. There would be no doubt in my mind that you would always be productive. But when those guys get in their own heads for whatever reason, or let somebody else into their own heads, it has the potential to kind of just throw off their entire day. And I think you see that with DK a lot, man. You just like, I think now other teams certainly know now, if you're an opposing cornerback and you stack up against DK and you're clearly, he overwhelms you physically. Well, you know, you can overwhelm him mentally if you want to. That's easy to be done. It's clear that if you play mind games with a guy like that, you're probably going to win. And teams are always going to use that to their advantage. I mean, I used to do it playing basketball all the time with guys. It's like, I'm not the best basketball player out there, but I know if I mess with your head a little bit, you might miss a free throw or get mad at me or do something stupid to cost your team. And when you find those guys and you can target those weaknesses, whatever those weaknesses are, you're going to do that. That's the whole idea of gamesmanship in sports. And I think seeing DK on the receiving end of that, when he's your guy, man, it just sucks because you're like, this dude should just be so much better than he is, and he's just not fulfilling that potential because he's letting dumb things get in the way.
Yeah, and by the way, he's not fulfilling his potential, and he's one of the best receivers in football without fulfilling his potential. That's how much potential he has. But also, you hear these stories, and it's like, it's endearing to hear DK Metcalf is learning to talk shit in sign language so that he doesn't get penalized. That is endearing. But it's less endearing. You know what I'd rather hear than he's learning sign language? How about he's learning to run fucking routes? Like, how about he's learning to become a consistent part of the passing attack and not a guy who makes, by the way, where he fails is not, he makes huge plays that are very important. And you don't want to get rid of that. You don't want to give up that. But you'd like to have the guy that's the highest paid player on the team, or the highest paid receiver on the team at least, be a guy who can show up in all four quarters. You know what I mean? Mentally and physically, who can be a contributor.
And literally show up if he's getting ejected.
Sure, exactly. Exactly. And again, like, I will say this. Sunday's game, not a great example, because I'm fine. If that's when he gets ejected, that's the best time to get ejected. Go nuts. Rip Fred Warner's head off. I don't give a shit. Mortal Kombat fatality to Fred Warner. I don't care at that point, but that's not the only time he's had problems this year.
Yeah.
And I want to be a guy that's like, Like, this dude should be a cornerstone of the future. But there's a part of you that's like, I mean, with the problem with him is, like, with Jamal Adams, you're like, he's playing badly and he's an asshole. Bench him. It's easy. For me, I'd rather see Julian Love getting more time. I'd rather see Devin Witherspoon. I'd rather see Michael Jackson or if Kobe Bryant or if Arsenio Hall. How many fucking famous names are they going to draft?
They do need an Arsenio Hall. That's what's next for them. Or, even like an Eddie Murphy. That's a pretty common name. You can find an Eddie
true.
Murphy.
D'Angelo Hall's probably got a kid running around. He named him Arsenio for the sake of but yeah, let's like get those guys some time. It's not a matter of like, if you like, there's value to be had in developing these younger guys who are honestly probably better game day contributors today. But with DK Metcalf, it's different because he's the most physically gifted player on the team and he's productive. We're splitting hairs on this guy is like, oh, could he be a borderline Pro Bowler or a borderline Hall of Famer? He's still very good. He's still a major contributor to this team.
Yeah.
But you look at him and you go, first off, the timing has been unfortunate because he has fucked up in super obvious, glaring moments that have become visible and painful for the fan base. And that's like unfortunate for him, unfortunate for the fan base, unfortunate for the team. I think there might be a loss. I can't remember exactly the circumstance, but there might be a loss you could pin on him this year. And what does that loss mean now? That loss, I mean, games in the NFL are huge. If you're a player...
I mean, it's more. I definitely get what you're saying. I think it's also just kind of a precedent that's being set with him.
Sure,
it's like this is proving to be something that's problematic and could continue to be problematic in big moments. And you don't want that when the guy is hurting the whole team with his actions. Then, especially in football, where your team is bigger than any other sport, it's glaring. These are big, glaring mistakes that are being made, and that's the really tough thing. And you're right. I mean, he's still going to be on the field because he's a talented player no matter what. I think just as a fan or anybody who follows football somewhat closely, you always just want these guys to be the best, especially when they're the most talented players, physically gifted the way he is. You just want them to be the best. And when they can't be the best, you're like, well, what's holding you back? And when it becomes obvious, when it's mental or things like that or emotional or whatever it might be, you just wish that they could get there and make that next step.
So the last story before we get out of here, Michael Penix Jr., who's, by the way, in this quarterback class, if Michael Penix Jr. plays as well as he did this year and comes out last year, he's probably a first-round pick. And I think he might end up being a third-round pick. I love the draft.
A lot of good quarterbacks this year. Yeah,
a lot of really good quarterbacks. Which is
great if you're a Seahawks fan. Great if you're a Seahawks fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Seahawks fans, well, it's a little more annoying now that you gave up the pick for Leonard Williams, but nonetheless, if a guy gets to the third round, that's great news. If you're a Seahawks fan, I'd love to see. I already have a Madden franchise running with Michael Penix as the Seahawks quarterback. There's nothing. It's hard to do anything but love Michael Penix as a player. He has an incredible season, and then we're in this postseason process, and I think in a lot of Seattle Pacific Northwest fans' mind, it was a question of, is it going to be Michael Penix or Bo Nix that wins the Heisman? And Bo Nix gets beaten by Michael Penix twice, and it's a foregone conclusion. Michael Penix for Heisman. It's so obvious. And then he loses to this guy from the SEC, which I think there's a certainly in this country, in college football, there's a bias towards the SEC. I think SEC fans are biased against the world. I think that in the Northwest, we're pretty ignorant to the SEC because our teams don't play the SEC very often. We don't, their games are on earlier probably. There's a lot of reasons why we don't like those dirty Southern racists probably is another reason, the coaches, they got to get rid of those accents, is that Orgeron still there?
No, he is currently doing ads for a golf apparel company called Roback.
I know Roback. That's the guy you want. Is the guy that talks like that, like the guy that sounds like if Froggy grew up to be a cigar smoker, a daily cigar smoker. So Jayden Daniels wins, by the way. Jayden Daniels of Arizona State fame.
That's really the thing that I think is funniest about Jayden Daniels winning. Now you could argue stats between Penix and Daniels all you want. Jayden Daniels was like an average quarterback in the Pac-12,
But
migrates over to the SEC and becomes one of the clearly the best in the nation, according to the very
sure,
subjective
but
voters.
Bo Nix came from the
The
SEC and
SEC.
became, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, that's true. That's a fair point.
all three of these guys, by the way, that we're talking about are great, I think, endorsements of the transfer process, because I don't think any of these guys finds a fit like they found if it's not for the transfer process.
Yeah,
They
all three of them can thank COVID and the way that
Yeah.
the transfer process opened up for really turning them into future NFL players when it probably would have been in some doubt if
Yeah.
they had been forced to stay with their original schools. But you're right. I mean, Jayden Daniels switches schools from ASU to LSU. Bo Nix comes from Auburn to Oregon. Penix comes from Indiana to Washington. I do think, Penix is the runner-up, and then Bo Nix is third, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was there for some reason. We don't know why. They needed a fourth guy, I guess. But those two quarterbacks, both Nix and Penix, I do feel like if they have the seasons they have in the SEC, either one of them, Jayden Daniels is probably a runner-up. I don't think he's the winner. I think it's just the voting for Heisman or any of those major awards in college football, especially, so subjective, and then very much geared toward the East Coast, which I understand. I mean, look, the reality of the Pac-12 or any West Coast college sports is it's just harder to watch, man. It's on so late at night, and that's, we're not voters, so we can say that. But if you're like a Heisman voter, you should at least make some effort to watch these games, and I'm sure they don't.
Sure.
I'm sure they don't. So it's like they're not seeing these guys play, and that really sucks. And both LSU and Oregon did a really, really good job marketing their guys as potential Heisman winners. They spent the whole season. Oregon bought a friggin' billboard in Times Square in New York to promote
Sure.
Bo Nix. LSU, in some ways, it's kind of a joke. They bought billboards around the country for Jayden Daniels, including one in Tukwila for some reason. They claimed it was in Seattle, but it was not. It was Tukwila, which, okay, whatever, man. but they either way, they were at least making a really strong effort to promote their guy. And I don't think UW did that as much with Michael Penix. They just didn't do a great job letting the world know that this guy was the passing leader in the nation. Like that's an important stat. That's a very critical stat for a Heisman race. He wins the Maxwell Award, so they at least acknowledge that he's, one of the best players in football, best quarterbacks in football, which is great. But everyone knows the Heisman. Any other award, it's like being the second guy who stepped foot on the moon. It's like some people might know you, but they'll definitely remember the guy who won the Heisman, right?
Yeah. So one good bit of news is that the Heisman has very little correlation with NFL success, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that win the Heisman and are significantly worse than other players at the same position, and usually aren't even necessarily. Here's the deal, though. Jayden Daniels playing against SEC defenses, which I don't think we should discount. They are very good defenses. Throws for 40 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, 3,800 yards. He's 400 in one fewer game. He's 400-ish behind Michael Penix. He also, and this is big, runs for 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, which is, by the way, college football includes sacks against a quarterback's rushing total. Michael Penix notably sacked very few times. For a quarterback, negative 18 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, he's not a runner. He's not a runner.
So,
though I'm sure like Stephen A. Smith or somebody like that will assume he's a running quarterback.
Yes, at some point. Remember when Dwayne Haskins, they did that about Dwayne Haskins?
I think it was Stephen A. Smith, and he was talking about Dwayne Haskins being a runner, and this guy's like never run out of the pocket ever. So, but I wonder why they thought he was a runner.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was him and not Trey Wingo, I'm not going to say why I'm happy it wasn't Trey Wingo. But anyway, yeah, I mean, to me, this is like pretty cut and dry. The guy who had the better season is Jayden Daniels. Not to take anything away from Michael Penix. And also,
the argument being made against Daniels is that if you go look at his stats in games against 2 particular teams, I think it was Georgia State, I think it was Grambling State was the other one. he racks up a ton of his stats in those games. Also LSU, and you can say this was a good idea, I guess, if you really want this guy to win an individual award. But in some of these blowouts where they're playing overmatched opponents and have really no reason to play their starting quarterback, they're leaving Jayden Daniels out there to rack up stats, which I don't think Washington did as much. And as a Husky fan, I'm glad they didn't do that as much. This guy has an injury history.
Sure. Also, by the way, if the Huskies beat any team by more than a single score, we could even make that argument.
Down the stretch, I mean, I would say that the Huskies had the number one strength of schedule at the end of the year. I mean, they were playing tough opponents all season long,
Sure.
and we know SEC opponents have a knack for finding some real cupcakes along the way. So, look, for me, a personal award for Michael Penix would be nice because I think he's a good dude, and it'd be nice for Washington to be able to claim their first Heisman Trophy. But if you're a team that's in the college football playoff, it's just kind of one more thing that these guys can use as fuel to motivate them as they look for a championship. So for me, I'm like, maybe this is a good thing.
And I love Michael Penix. The story is great. The guy seems amazing. I would rather have him as the Huskies starting quarterback. I think he's probably going to have a better NFL profile, although that might not be. We're going to talk about that. We can keep talking about that as the draft approaches. It's kind of cool to have a guy that really has a legit shot at being like a day 2, day 1 pick that was a Husky, which they've had some very good quarterbacks. I think everybody kind of, when Jake Locker got drafted as high as he did, I was like, ugh, that seems like that's a dicey proposition to me. You got like right-handed Tebow. I mean, that's my honest opinion.
That's basically what he became. So yeah,
sure. I mean, it's kind of what he was in college too. But which is, by the way, Tim Tebow was a great college quarterback. I guess I can't bring myself to be super angry about this. I think like you, it sounds like I would significantly rather the Huskies win a national championship than Michael Penix win the Heisman. Both these things were very unlikely, but anyway, I'm about to have to go, so I'll give you the closing words, and then we'll say the old Twitter handles that nobody listens long enough for this to matter, and move on.
Well, I'll just
even Frank Castro by the way, this weekend, December 16th, Bickerson's Brewhouse. This is so late in the podcast to do this. You got to remind me. I'm so bad at this part of having a podcast. It's like the point of having a podcast. Yeah, you got to remind me to plug. Can you get something to plug so you remind me that I have something to plug? Please, for the love of God. Bickerson's Brewhouse, December 16th. Mike Coletta headlining. Alex Kaufman featuring. I will not be there, which that might be better for everybody that listens to this. You've heard enough of me. Phil Klingler is guest hosting. And I'll be December 28th. I'm at Side Hustle Brewing in Kirkland, Washington, headlining. And it's a door deal. I'm taking a little bit of a risk on myself. So please buy some tickets for that if you live out there. Jesus, do any of Alex's friends live in Kirkland? We got to get these people to buy some tickets.
Do people in Kirkland like comedy? They're probably just looking for things to do. They'll come out for that.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't really have anything to promote. So, the Huskies do have a great NFL quarterback now, though. We have Jake Browning. He played amazing the other day. I actually picked him up on my fantasy team and should have started him, as it turns out. Yeah, he's not as bad as I thought he would be.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see the guys that just stick around forever. Like Sean Mannion is the Seahawks. You're like, oh shit, Sean Mannion. I remember Sean Mannion. What, Oregon State, right?
Oregon State, yeah.
Yeah, I remember being like, that guy's never going to be an NFL quarterback, and it turns out he's going to be an NFL quarterback for a very, very, very long time.
You just got to be willing to sit there and hold that clipboard, and if you do that long enough, you might get to play.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for, basically, in a backup. And they found it, and Browning's delivering. So,
all right,
good luck to
end on one. By the way, this is a reward for anyone that stuck around. Jake Heaps had a radio show here, obviously has had a dubious coaching career or whatever you call it, in life coaching career in Denver. I discovered that another guy, Jake Heaps, I feel like has made more out of less than anybody in the history of sports media, because the guy was like just a high school recruit. That's it. He had a bad college career, no NFL career. He's tagged along with Russell Wilson somehow. I don't know what occurred in the couple weeks that he was in training camp with the Seahawks that they became such great friends. Maybe he was the one guy left in that locker room that gave a shit about Russell Wilson. Max Brown has a broadcasting career, which makes Max Brown makes Jake Heaps look like Dan Marino. Like, he did nothing. This man did nothing, and he's got a broadcasting career.
Yeah, he's an even bigger high school recruit in a way. He was kind of riding the Jake Heaps coattails out of Skyline High School. Yeah, now he seems to. Here's the thing about Max Brown, man. He's tall. He looks good on TV. He looks like he should be in a Hallmark movie.
Sure.
So of course he's going to have a decent broadcasting career. I don't know, as long as he can put words together.
Yeah, that's actually true. Not Brady. I was going to say Brady Quinn. Jake Heaps did more with less. That is true. He is not nearly as good looking as Max Brown.
Yeah, Max Brown is more like Brady Quinn, like you were about to say. He's just he can make that thing work. I don't know if that's what he does full time. I think he has a full time job and tries to like dabble in broadcasting.
Is that what it is?
But I know he was on some Pac-12 network games this year, and obviously that's going away. So hopefully he catches on somewhere.
I also, by the way, take a look. Everybody Google Max Brown right now, and like the first pictures that come up. Listen, I'm not afraid to say when I see a good looking man. I'm not that kind of guy. If whatever you're seeing in Max Brown, I don't see.
You don't think he's tall. That's
okay,
all that
height.
matters.
He's got height. He'll make a sideline reporter look short. We never got to. By the way, we got to talk about Carissa Thompson at some point. Anyways, we got too many topics flying. I've hit my heart out. Thank you, everybody. I love you so deeply for listening to this podcast. Please keep tuning in.
All right.
Tell them bye.
Oh, bye.